Hey everybody, Jeff here. I wanted to do a short video on budget lighting. I have a number of students who will come to me and say, Jeff, I don't have thousands of dollars to spend on strobe equipment or high-end continuous lights. What can I do, in my living room to do some still life or maybe even some portraiture, on those dark days we don't have natural light. How do I not spend thousands of dollars? So we're going to look at 6 different lights here. And I'll talk about the prices of each, the color temperature of each, the brightness values of each, so you can kind of get an idea as to what is out there and how to maybe make some determinations about the sort of lighting that you need. First off, I want to say that we're going to be putting our video exposure settings down below here in this video so you can kind of follow along, get an idea. We're shooting on a Fuji X-T30 camera on a gimbal, and first off, we have this $15 chicken light, or clamp light as they call it, something that you get at like a hardware store. In order to kind of get an idea of the brightness value, the thing that I like to do is I'll use a light meter, and I'll get my exposures of a particular lamp, whatever it may be. I'll even do this with strobes. I'll do it with speed lights as well. I want to know at full power what that thing can get me at about 5 to 6 feet away. And so I've got tape lined out on the floor here, about 6 feet away from each light, and I want to know at a given f-stop what sort of shutter speed I'm going to get. So a lot of camera technology today, the ISOs are creeping up, and we're getting less noisy digital sensors as the camera chips keep getting better, so that's a nice feature. But let's just pin this down at ISO 400, just to kind of give us a decent enough of a shutter speed, get an idea as to the brightness of these lamps. So I'm going to say, what will each of these give me in terms of shutter speed if I go aperture priority at about f11? Let's start off. Chicken light here from about 6 feet away, and if I meter this, it tells me at ISO 400, f11 and 3/10 at quarter second. So I'd need a quarter second shutter speed to get a decent exposure at ISO 400 at about f11. All right, so this next light we're going to look at is a $45 light. It's a 500 watt Impact brand. It's a hot light, it's continuous light. So far, all of the lights that we're looking at today, none of them are strobe. They're all going to be continuous light sources. When you get into that budget category, you don't really get the strobe so much. This one has a 500 watt bulb in it, and it along with the chicken light that we just looked at are tungsten color, tungsten light bulbs. So they're coming in at that 3200 Kelvin temperature. So we're going to take a look at its brightness value at ISO 400 at about f11, and this one comes in at 1/15 of a second. So 2 stops brighter than our chicken light, which came in at quarter second. This one's coming in at 1/15 of a second, 2 stops brighter, 500 watt light.
I think that's great.
So this next light we're going to look at is a $100 light. You'll notice that we're going to be going in order of price, just for comparison value. You notice that the chicken light came in at a quarter second shutter speed at f11 and 1/3. Then we came to this Impact 500 watt light that came in 2 stops brighter at 1/15 of a second. And now we're going to look at this Genere LED. Probably more popular with videographers than still photographers, but it's worth looking at because it's $100. I think it was like $99.95 out there that I saw. So let's take a look at its brightness value. It's on its brightest setting right now. The interesting part about this light is that it can be both tungsten color temperature as well as daylight. On its brightest setting, it has to have both of those sets of bulbs activated. So we'll go ahead and take a reading of this. And again, this one's coming in at 11 1/3 at quarter second. So its brightness value is about the same as that chicken light. So you can see here the functionality of it. I can spin a dial on the back, and it can be all daylight, a much cooler color temperature, or all tungsten. My personal opinion, I work with some of these with video, and I use a separate color meter altogether in order to get the most accurate color out of them. Pure tungsten lights are they're not gonna have any crazy weird spikes in the magenta or green spectrum or any other sort of weird artifacting, whereas these LEDs can get a little weird. They have CRIs associated with them based upon how accurate their color temperatures are. When I work with LEDs, I use a color meter so that I can dial that in exactly. Probably, less of a concern with still photography, shooting raw and, using a color checker or a gray card, you can kind of dial that in. But for video, color temperature is much more significant, I would say. All right, so our next light is a little bit different. These, the first two were hot lights. They get hot, chicken light and the impact 500 watt. The third light that we did was an LED light, doesn't get so hot, which is a nice feature of it. And then now this fourth light that we're looking at is the Impact 3. It's a daylight balanced fluorescent tube fixture. Comes in at about $150 total with everything. And we'll look at its values here at about 6 feet away. And again, we're looking at about 1/4 second, f11 and 1/3. So it's comparable to in output to the LED and the chicken light, but it's daylight balanced. So, that's a consideration. It would be cooler, not only in temperature, but also to touch. It's not going to run as hot as a hot light, one of these other sort of tungsten bulb lamps. So our next light is a Lowel DP light. It is a kind of a traditional hot light, really, in terms of, they've kind of been around for a long time, used on, film sets as well as still photography. Let's take its reading here. And at ISO 400 again, about 6 feet away, 11 and 1/3, we're coming in at 1/15 of a second. So it's comparable to the Impact 500 watt light, even though this one's 1,000 watt. And it comes in at $193. So, more expensive than some of these other ones. This light, I will say, one of its benefits is that right now it's in the flood mode. There's a spot mode. Let's spot it down and see. It's very bright. So if I spot this fella down and I take a reading at the center of that beam, now we've gone from 1/15 of a second to 1/125th of a second at f11 and 1/3. So that's a considerable jump when it's in the spot feature. I'd say the main downside of this light is it's a hot light. Man, it gets hot. I can feel the heat off of this. This puppy is keeping me warm. It's super bright. If you got this in too close to any sort of plastic diffusion or gels, for sure you're going to run into issues of melting. There's only a couple of areas on the light itself that you can even touch without burning yourself. It's a hot light. So the last light we're going to look at, it comes in, it's more expensive than the others at about $470 thereabouts. It's an Arri 300. They call them cans in the industry. It's an Arri 300 can. And it's a tungsten light source. It's got a Fresnel lens in the front of it, which helps create a more focused beam. It, much like the Lowel DP, has a flood and a spot feature. Right now we're in flood. We'll take a reading at ISO 400. And again, we're looking at 1/15 of a second at about 11 and 1/3. So the Arri light, the Lowel DP light, and the Impact 500 watt light at 6 feet away in flood are all about the same exposure. Even though the Lowel is 1,000 watt and then this Arri is a 300 watt bulb, they're all reading about the same exposure in the flood. Now, if we take this Arri light and we put it into spot mode, we'll see what its brightness value is. And this one jumps up to 60th of a second at f11, 11 and 1/3. So these are some of the considerations that I look at when I'm looking at this kind of equipment is, well, how bright do I need it to be in terms of the types of f-stops that I'm looking for? And the kind of work that you're trying to do. If I was shooting any kind of portraiture, I'd probably want to go with the brightest light I can to get the fastest shutter speed that I can at the highest ISO that I can. If I don't have the budget to get into strobe lighting, which is really where you'd want to be if you're shooting a lot of portraiture on the regular. But if you're doing any kind of tabletop, still life type stuff, maybe you're shooting some food, that kind of thing, and your daylight's not bright enough, and in the place that you're shooting, any of these lights would work for any kind of tabletop scenario because you can put your camera on tripod and have a real slow shutter speed and not have to worry about it too much. And of course, we're doing all this at f11, so if you're shooting something at like f4, well, you've had that reciprocity with your shutter speed built in. So if I only had a couple $100 to spend on lighting, I would probably go with this Impact 500 light. It doesn't have the spot feature that some of these other more expensive lights have, but in terms of its output, it's comparable to these more expensive lights in their flood mode. And for a couple $100, I could get a couple of these, maybe even 3 of them. Some light stands and maybe build some cheap diffusion and go with that. If I had a little bit more money to spend, like let's say I have maybe $500 total, rather than getting a almost $500 Arri can, I would probably just get a couple of these almost $200 Lowel DPs. The benefit that I get is I can get that 1/125th at f11 from 6 feet away in the spot mode. So if I'm shooting that through any kind of diffusion, it's going to give me quite a bit of output. So those are the considerations I would say with this kind of equipment. If you liked this video, hit that thumbs up. If you didn't like the video, hit the thumbs down. Feel free to comment down below. Hit the subscribe button to see more of this content. That little bell down there will notify you of more content. Thanks for watching.